He tracked her down after 15 years, and she let him into her hotel room. The man from her past promised to save her, but what he really wanted was her body. Part 1. The Weight of Memory. Chapter 1. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in October, buried in a pile of work emails from the Cedar Falls Regional Housing Authority, where I'd spent the last 11 years of my life reviewing permit applications and pretending that zoning regulations could fill the hollow space behind my ribs. The email had a subject line that was aggressively cheerful. Class of 2005 Mid-State University Alumni Reunion, save the date. Below it, in smaller text, "You're going to be in town anyway. Come." I'd moved back to Cedar Falls after graduation, the kind of small American city that newspapers call quaint when they mean forgotten, the kind of place where everyone knows your last name before you introduce yourself. And the most exciting thing that happens in any given week is a new menu item at the diner on Main Street. My parents were here. My ex-husband had been here. The life I'd built in this place was small and beige and quietly suffocating, and I'd long since stopped asking myself whether it was enough. But the reunion was in Riverside, 200 miles north, the city where I'd spent 4 years chasing a degree in public administration and believing, with the untouchable confidence of youth, that my future would be something magnificent, that I would become someone extraordinary, that the world had rooms in it I hadn't yet entered, and that when I finally did, I would know exactly what to say and do and be. It was in Riverside that I'd first met Daniel Harper. I still remembered the first time I saw him. Chapter 2. The Welcome Mixer was in the grand ballroom of the Mid-State University Student Union, a soaring space with vaulted ceilings and chandeliers that cast amber light across the heads of hundreds of students who had come from all over the state to attend a university that was, for most of us, the furthest we'd ever been from home. I was 22. I had on a green dress I'd bought at a outlet mall the week before I left for school, a dress that I thought at the time was sophisticated and adult, and the kind of thing a woman of the world would wear to a party, but which I now recognize was slightly too short and slightly too bright, and very clearly the dress of a girl who was trying very hard to be something she wasn't yet. I was standing near the punch bowl, which was the universal signal for, "I don't know anyone and I'm too nervous to start a conversation," when Daniel Harper walked into the room. He was tall, about 6'1", maybe 6'2", with dark hair that he wore slightly too long in a way that suggested either artistic sensibility or a complete indifference to grooming standards, and a way of carrying himself that was already, at 24, unmistakably confident. He had on a navy blazer and gray slacks and shoes that were polished, and when he walked into that ballroom, he walked like a man who had never once in his life wondered whether he belonged in the room he was entering. He was the president of the Midwest Students Association, our version of the Hometown Alumni Network, connecting students from the same hometowns who attended Mid-State. His job, essentially, was to make people from Cedar Falls and surrounding towns feel less alone in a university where most of the other students came from much larger cities and much more impressive high schools. He organized potlucks. He arranged carpools home for holidays. He was, in the way of such positions, both a leader and a caretaker. He was also, I would later learn, completely certain of what he wanted at all times. That night at the mixer, he walked directly across the room to where I was standing by the punch bowl, and he looked at me with those dark eyes, dark brown, almost black in the amber light of the chandeliers, and he said, "Catherine Miller, you're from Cedar Falls. I know your brother." I didn't have a brother. This was, as far as I knew, a verifiable fact. I was an only child, had been an only child for my entire life, and the closest thing I had to a brother was my second cousin Derek, who was 17 and mostly interested in video games and had never, to my knowledge, played basketball at a community center. I don't have a brother, I said. You have a brother, Daniel said, smiling. It was not a question. It was not even a statement. It was a declaration, the kind of thing a man says when he has already decided what is true and is simply informing you of the facts. Mark. We played basketball at the community center on Saturday mornings. He's the reason I know about you. That was a lie. I found out later, much later, that he'd never met anyone named Mark from Cedar Falls. But at 22, standing in that ballroom with the string lights catching in his eyes and the punch bowl bubbling behind me, and my heart suddenly beating very fast for reasons I didn't understand, I didn't care. Really? I said. What did he say about me? He said you were stubborn, Daniel said, and that you had a temper, and that you were the kind of person who knew what you wanted and didn't let anyone tell you different. That's not, I started, and then I stopped, because actually, that was fairly accurate. How do you know all that? I told you. We played basketball. We both knew he was lying. Neither of us acknowledged it. He smiled at me, that smile, the one that had probably worked on every woman he'd ever encountered since puberty, and I smiled back, and something shifted in the room. Or maybe nothing shifted and I just imagined it. But I can tell you this. When Daniel Harper looked at me in that ballroom in October of 2001, I felt seen in a way I had never felt before. Not understood, exactly, but seen, like someone had finally noticed I was in the room. He got my QQ number that night, not by asking, by telling me he was going to have it. Give me your QQ number, he said. Not, can I have it? Or, would you mind? Give me your QQ number. And I did. I wrote it on a napkin and handed it to him and watched him put it in his blazer pocket like it was something important, something he was going to take care of. 3 days later, he texted me, Hey Bobby, this is Daniel. Bobby, baby. In Chinese, it was an endearment that some men used casually, the way American men might say, hun or sweetheart. But from Daniel, who was Chinese American, third generation, who had grown up in a household where his grandparents spoke Cantonese, and his parents had tried to raise him with some connection to his heritage from Daniel, it sounded different. It sounded like a claim, like he had already decided that I belonged to him in some way, and this was simply the verbal confirmation of a fait accompli. I saved his number. I responded to every message he sent me for the next 2 years. Number, Chapter 3. We kept in touch after I graduated in 2005 and moved back to Cedar Falls. Different cities, 200 miles between us. But he'd text me long messages about his day, about the promotions he was chasing at the logistics firm where he'd landed a job straight out of college, about the women he was dating and why none of them understood him. I read every word. I responded to every one. I told myself it was nostalgia. I told myself it was the natural fading attachment of two people who had once been something and were now just friends. I told myself a lot of things in those years, and most of them were lies I needed to believe because the truth was too frightening to sit with. The truth was that I was in love with Daniel Harper and had been since that night in the ballroom. The truth was that no man I had ever met had made me feel the way he did, seen and desired, and somehow both safe and terrified at the same time. The truth was that I would have done anything he asked, and I knew on some level that this was dangerous. But I was 25, and then 27, and then 30, and the dangerous feeling never quite outweighed the addictive one. In 2008, he came to Cedar Falls for a work conference. He called me from his hotel room, the Cedar Falls Marriott, which was the only hotel in town worth staying in, and asked me to come by. I drove there on a Saturday night, 15 minutes from my apartment, and when I walked into that room, I knew exactly what was going to happen. I knew, and I went anyway. I went because I'd been waiting for this since I was 22, and I was 30 years old, and if I was going to make the mistake of sleeping with Daniel Harper, I at least wanted to make it while I was still young enough to recover from it. What followed was both everything I'd imagined and nothing like I'd expected. He was gentle at first, surprising given the intensity of his personality. He kissed me like he was unwrapping something fragile. He called me Bobe again, and this time when he said it, I understood what it meant in his mouth. It meant, "You are mine." It meant, "I have been waiting for this." It meant, "You are finally here." I spent the night. In the morning, before I left, he made me coffee from the small machine in the room and sat on the edge of the bed and watched me drink it. And he said, "This doesn't change anything." And I said, "I know." And we both knew that was a lie. But we said it anyway because the alternative was acknowledging that everything had just changed completely. After that, everything was different. Not in the way you'd expect. We didn't start dating, didn't become a couple, didn't move toward anything that looked like a normal relationship. What happened instead was that we settled into a pattern that would define the next 20 years of our lives. Intensity and distance, closeness and coldness, the sense that we were both perpetually circling each other without ever quite landing. He went back to Riverside. I stayed in Cedar Falls. We texted less frequently, but with more weight messages that felt like letters, like confessions, like the kind of communication that should require a locksmith and a therapist to decode. He told me about his job, about the promotions he was getting, about the women his colleagues kept trying to set him up with. I told him about my job at the housing authority, about my dating life, about the man I'd started seeing named Kevin, a nice man, a stable man, an accountant who laughed at his own jokes, and always put his dishes in the dishwasher, and had absolutely no idea that I was spending half my nights reading text messages from another man like they were scripture. When I told Daniel I was getting serious with Kevin, he didn't say anything for a long time. Then he texted, "Are you sure he's the one?" I didn't respond. 3 days later, he texted again. "I just want you to be happy, Catherine. You deserve someone who sees you, someone who knows what you want before you say it." Kevin proposed in 2011. I said yes. I told myself it was the right decision. I told myself Daniel and I had been a chapter, and now I was turning the page. Daniel texted me when he heard about the engagement. Just 2 words. "Congratulations, Bobby." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Love quiet, forbidden midlife romance? Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. Part 2. The Reunion. Number Chapter 4. The invitation to the Mid-State reunion arrived in October of 2019, 14 years after graduation. 14 years of sporadic texts and 1 or 2 annual phone calls that always happened late at night and always ended with one of us saying something we shouldn't have said. I was 47. My mother had died 8 months earlier. The investment in my brother-in-law's restaurant had imploded 6 months before that. Kevin and I were technically still married, but had been sleeping in separate bedrooms for over a year. An arrangement that we both understood was a precursor to divorce, but that neither of us had the energy to initiate. I was living in a 2-bedroom apartment I could barely afford, working a job that had stopped challenging me sometime around the 2nd term of George W. Bush, and feeling on most days like I was watching my own life from somewhere just outside my body. The reunion was in Riverside, the same city where I'd met Daniel. The same city where we'd spent that night in the Marriott in 2008. The same city that existed in my memory as a place of possibility and youth, and the particular ache of wanting something you can't have. I registered online. I booked a hotel room, the Harlow, a mid-range business hotel that Riverside had probably considered upscale in 2008, but that had since been outclassed by newer developments. I told myself I was going for nostalgia. I told myself it would be good to see old friends, old classmates, the people I'd shared those 4 years with before everything got complicated. I did not tell myself that I was going because I wanted to see Daniel Harper, but I was. I knew it. And some part of me wondered if he knew it too. Chapter 5. I checked into the Harlow on a Friday evening in late October. The drive up from Cedar Falls had taken 4 hours longer than expected because of construction outside of Bloomington, and I was exhausted by the time I got to my room. I opened the door and saw the narrow bed with its beige coverlet and the water-stained ceiling tiles and the window that looked out onto a parking lot, and I thought, this is exactly where I belong. This cheap room, this mediocre hotel, this city that isn't home. This is the visual equivalent of how I've been living. I took a shower. I changed into casual clothes, jeans, and a sweater. Nothing special. I was 47 years old, and I had stopped trying to look beautiful for anyone except myself. And even that effort had become sporadic and half-hearted. I sat on the bed and turned on the television and stared at it without seeing. And then my phone buzzed. I looked at the screen. Daniel, I'm on the 4th floor. Room 412. Come have breakfast with me in the morning. I stared at the message. I had not told him I was coming. I had not told him what hotel I was staying at. I had not told him anything, because we hadn't been in serious contact in over a year, just the perfunctory holiday texts, the occasional birthday message, the kind of low-maintenance communication that keeps a door open without requiring anyone to walk through it. And yet he knew I was here, knew what floor, knew what room, knew my number well enough to text me at I checked the time 9:30 on a Friday night. I texted back, "How did you know I was here?" He didn't respond immediately. The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. And then, "I have my ways. I've always had my ways with you, Catherine." Number, chapter 6. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in that narrow bed in that beige hotel room and thought about Daniel Harper, about the 15 years that had passed since that night in the ballroom, about the man I had been at 22 and the woman I'd become at 47, and I wondered which one of us was more lost. Daniel had aged, of course, we both had, but Daniel had aged the way some men do, into himself, into his power. He'd made deputy director at the logistics firm by 40, and then regional director by 45. And by the time he was 50, he was one of the most senior executives in the company's Midwest operations. He had money now. He had status. He had a corner office with a view of the river and a watch on his wrist that I was fairly certain cost more than my car. But more than that, he had developed the quality that powerful men develop, the quality of expectation. He no longer asked for things. He announced them. He no longer wondered whether people would comply. He simply assumed they would. And they did. Because that's what happens when you spend 2 decades accumulating the ability to make things happen. When I stepped off the elevator on the 4th floor the next morning, he was standing in the hallway outside room 412, as though he'd been waiting for me. He was wearing a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up and slacks, and a watch that caught the fluorescent light. And when he saw me unshowered, hair still damp, wearing the same jeans and sweater from last night, his face did something I hadn't seen before. He smiled, but it wasn't the smile I remembered from the ballroom or from that night in Cedar Falls. It was something more complex, something that contained, within it, a calculation I couldn't quite read. "Catherine," he said. Not Kathy, Catherine. The full weight of my name in his mouth. "Daniel." He opened the door behind him and stepped back to let me in. The room was larger than mine, a corner suite, clearly upgraded, the kind of room that gets assigned to executives who know how to ask for things. There was a bottle of wine on the desk that hadn't been opened, and 2 glasses beside it, and the bed was made with military precision, and everything in the room smelled faintly of his cologne, something expensive, something that had probably been a gift from someone who wanted his favor. "Sit," he said. Not an invitation, a command. I sat. He lay down on the bed, not on the chair, not on the couch, on the bed, on top of the covers, with his shoes still on arms behind his head, looking at me like I was the guest and he was the host and this was his room and his hotel and his city and his world. "You look good," he said. "I'm 47, Daniel." "Better," he said. "You look better than you did at 22. I didn't know what to say to that. The compliment was absurd. I had crow's feet and gray at my temples and a body that had been through a decade of sitting at a desk and eating dinner alone, but the way he said it made me feel, for a moment, like maybe it was true. Like maybe he was seeing something I couldn't see. "You flew in last night," he said. "Your flight was at 11. You have an 11 a.m. flight home tomorrow." I stared. "How do you know what time my flight is?" He smiled. "I told you. I have my ways, Daniel." "That's creepy." "That's accurate," he said. "I've always been accurate where you're concerned." Number. Chapter 7. The reunion was a disaster. Not because anything went wrong, but because everything Daniel had said and done that morning sat in my chest like a stone through every conversation I tried to have. I smiled at people whose names I'd forgotten. I drank wine I couldn't taste. I excused myself twice to go to the bathroom and stood at the sink, running cold water over my wrists, asking myself what I was doing here, why I had come, what I had expected to happen. The problem was that I knew exactly what I'd expected to happen. I had expected to see Daniel Harper in a room full of people and feel nothing. I had expected the years and the distance and the accumulated weight of disappointment to have neutralized whatever chemical reaction had been happening between us since I was 22. I had expected to be immune, but that is not what happened. What happened instead was that I saw him across the ballroom at the reunion, tall, distinguished, holding a glass of wine and talking to a group of our former classmates, and I felt my heart do something it hadn't done in years.